Hi, everyone. This is a panel called What Publishers Want, How to Get Your Indie Game Funded. During this panel, we'll be discussing the publishing model and what goes into a pitch, what publishers are looking for in indie teams, and we'll discuss alternative forms of funding, including the game fund model as well as self-distribution. My name is Matthew Glenn. I'm an indie developer with Digital Daydream. My pronouns are he, him, and we're in Raleigh, North Carolina. First off, we're going to start with introductions with Tanya Short.
Hey, Tanya X Short, she, her. I'm the captain of Kitfox Games, which is primarily a developer. We started out publishing our own games on Steam and consoles, and I'll probably talk about this more later, but we had some friends that thought we could help by publishing them, so we got into that as well. And I'm also a game designer most of the time during the day. So if I talk about game design, you can say, stop, let's talk more about publishing.
Okay. Next up, Lindsey Rostal.
Hey, I'm Lindsey Rostal, she, her. I am a partner at Kowloon Nights, which is an indie game fund, and I also run a studio on the side, which is Timberline Studio, so I have a bit of that crossover as well. But I'm going to talk about the differences in funding where it's not quite the same publisher model.
Great. Next up, Xalavier Nelson.
Hi, everyone. My name is Xalavier Nelson Jr. Pronouns are he, him. I'm a narrative director in games. You might know me from my work on Hypnospace Outlaw, We're the Caretakers, and Airport for Aliens, currently run by Dog Skatebird, or literally dozens of other games. And I'm going to be talking about making more sustainable games by making things shorter, faster, better, cheaper.
All sound great. Next up, Brian Kwek.
Hi, so I'm Brian. My pronouns are he, him, and I run Ysbryd Games, a publisher for, we say, weird, wonderful games with spirit. And we are best known for publishing games like Valhalla, Cyberpunk Bartending Action, and World of Horror.
Exciting. David Martinez.
Hey, everybody. My name is David. Pronouns are he, him. I am the co-founder of Raw Fury. We're an indie publishing label that's been around since 2015. And our goal originally, and still is to have better relationships with developers than is traditionally known with publishers. I think a lot of publishers get a bad rep. Nobody on this panel, because everyone here is super cool. But on the indie side of things, we've been trying to change things up little by little. And that has been our guiding mantra ever since we started. We're probably most well known for the Kingdom series. And we've also published some cool stuff like Bad North and Dara. And Star Renegades is one coming up next.
Great. And we have Kris and Antoni.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kris Antoni, he, him. I'm co-founder and also the lead barista in Toge Productions. So we made a game called Coffee Talk, and we also not only develop our own games, but we also help other Indonesian and Southeast Asian developers publish their games to the global market. Basically, we want to, bring or maybe bridge underrepresented communities, Southeast Asian communities mostly, bring their stories to the world. And we've started our publishing initiative back in 2017, and it actually didn't start. It started just we just want to help our fellow indie developers in Indonesia, and it kind of grew from there.
Great. Okay. Our first question is going to be for Tanya. It's sort of a big question. What does a publisher do, and why might you need one?
Well, I'm going to try to not talk for a whole hour about that, but because the answer is that it totally varies, and it depends on what you need and what the publisher can offer. And so that's actually sort of the first thing that a publisher does want to know, actually, is what do you need? Because typically the reason that you want a publisher is that you're missing something. Either you're missing the capability of finding your audience, you're missing localization contacts because you want to translate your game, you're missing some kind of aspect of getting the game to the point where you can release it confidently and know that it has a decent chance of getting played by somebody. And so every publisher kind of has a slightly different specialty. But typically, the number one skill set that even a very, very talented developer is missing is marketing. And so it'll come up again and again over the next hour, I'm sure. But most publishers, their offer is you make the game, and we'll find an audience for you. And hopefully, that's already an audience they have access to in some way. But that's the main thing, the discussion of how do you make sure the publisher does what they're going to do, they do what they're going to say they're going to do, but then how do you work with them to give your game the best chance possible?
Great.
I don't know if anyone disagrees. Feel free to disagree with me at any time, by the way. But I guess the biggest example of that is Dwarf Fortress, actually, which is a very different game than the games that Kitfox normally makes. We make little like action RPGs. But I was friends with Tarn, who's making Dwarf Fortress, and he was like, I don't really want to handle the whole Steam deal. Like, he has his own website and he had his own community. So his problem wasn't reaching people. His problem was like dealing with Steam. Because that's a whole different ball game than having your own website. And I said, yeah, sure, we can help you with that, and we'll take a percentage and that kind of thing. And we'll handle talking to press and journalists, and we'll schedule newsletters, and we'll do all these things that you don't want to do, so you can focus on making your dwarves, I don't know, go mad and kill each other and whatever it is that you want to do in your next Dwarf Fortress update. But that's like one out of 1,000 different ways that relationship can work.
So you have to do more than just make a game. You have to tell people about it, I guess. So
yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of developers are very creative folks that only want to focus on doing that stuff, and so they're okay with finding a publisher or a partner of some sort that will help them take care of all the other stuff that they just don't want to handle, which is fine. I mean, that's when folks like us can come in. I mean, you could probably make a reasonable argument that no independent developer actually needs a publisher. It's just a matter of what they think they might get as a benefit in exchange for, a cut of revenue or something like that. But I mean,
especially when you're like 1 or 2 people, it's like, how much time are you going to take away from developing to do that marketing? It's a huge job.
It's gigantic. Like, the undertaking is pretty massive, and some teams understand that, and that's why they might look for a publisher. And other teams don't understand that and underestimate the amount of work. And then, hopefully they're still successful. And if they're not, then maybe the next time, if they want to make a game, they could consider a publisher. But I mean, we've seen plenty of cases on both sides, right, where it seems like a game just came out of the blue, but actually it was just a developer that garnered themselves a really good Twitter following, and they were able to promote themselves pretty successfully, and that's what you want to see. That's great, but those are also like that kind of like the outliers, if you will. A lot of the time, you don't hear about the other 100 developers who tried the same thing and it didn't work out, which is always a huge bummer.
And that happens regardless of whether or not you are published, as you can attest. Like, the nature of game development is such that a lot of what we do is throwing shots into the void. Now, we can take measured, intentional steps to increase our chances for success, but the reality is a lot of what we do, as measured and intentional as it is inherently risky and creative, and as a result, dangerous. So every developer, one of the things I'm looking forward to in this panel is every developer has to consider their own risks and vulnerabilities and how a publisher may or may not serve those things.
Yeah, and I think that opens up a question of sustainability. Like, how does, when you're taking those risks as a developer, like, I guess the risk is a little different when you're a publisher and you have a little bit more money than the developer itself. This isn't on the list of questions, but I think it opened one. Xalavier, as far as making games like sustainably, how do you feel that, like, in relation to self-funding, that you do that? Like, how do you make games consistently and sustainably?
The major thing that I look into is being very frank. There's 6 things that developers need support in often. They would like funding. Money is very important. Marketing. Legal support. You don't want to get sued, or at least when you get sued, you want someone to help you with that. you want marketing, funding, legal, porting, localization, and quality assurance, QA. For those 6 needs, especially for the newer developers out there, what you might not realize is when you get a publisher, one way or another, you often are paying for all of those things, but it's coming out of something called recoup. All the funding you receive, all the marketing, legal support, all that is added to a tally that at the end of development, when the game comes out, that is essentially a debt that needs to be paid off before you can begin to see your full revenue share cut from the game, however many ways you've divided it with between your collaborators and also your publisher. When you have hundreds of thousands in that recoup column for games that are already inherently risky, or rather games that are already in an inherently risky medium, and you're receiving 40% after the hundreds of thousands are paid, if it hits that hundreds of thousands at all, that isn't a model for sustainable development. Every other medium that has sustainable long-term careers for its creators has an emphasis on long-term passive revenue, on holding on to songwriter rights, holding on to streaming and distribution deals, thinking about how one production benefits your next 10 years as opposed to the next 2. So a big thing that I emphasize for sustainable development is quite simply, we're in one of the very few mediums where you can make something for $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 and have it reach a global audience. But that is a space of design and budget that is not seen as legitimate. If you want to be a real game, you got to have a publisher and $1,000 budget and have a moonshot every time. What I emphasize in my development approach is sometimes I make large things, sometimes I make small things, but every single thing I make is deeply focused and so far basically made without publisher support, because I know every time I put something out into this world, however well it does, because I've controlled the costs and that I've taken on, because I've looked into the full scope of what I'm doing, and because I have built up this not to be undervalued skill that everyone here has spoken about in terms of marketing and business development, all things that are perfectly legitimate reasons to bring on a publisher or bring on someone who's a specialist in that, maybe give them revenue share cut or pay a contractor or so on. Every time I put one of those things into the world, it has a chance to be the big one. And the more things I put into the world, the more chances you get, and the more passive revenue I have coming in to fund whatever I do next. Sometimes I put out a game and it just gives me pizza money every month. But if I've got 10 or 20 games giving me pizza money every month, if I don't have contracting revenue for a month, 2 months, that I'll actually turn out to be pretty okay.
Okay.
Can I chime in a little bit? Because I think that Xalavier is saying something really important, and it's part of the cultural shift over the last 5-10 years. Is I think it's more common for publishers to not take 100% recoup up front, and that's very important for helping developers be sustainable. I think the more that developers get even some percentage as the publisher is recouping, it can really help them eat something while the publisher is recouping. So where possible, that's definitely a clause that publishers do not want to talk about typically. But maybe as a developer is good to bring up and ask, how will I survive if we don't recoup for a few months or a few years?
And as a small addendum to that, part of the reason that's so important, and that I love that Tanya brings that up, because Tanya is a good person, is because most people often don't realize that when you put out your game, you actually don't get paid immediately the first time someone pays for something. You can be waiting between 1 to 4 months before your first payment comes in on a platform. How are you eating during those 1 to 4 months? Are you getting some revenue during that 1 to 4 months? Those are really important questions to ask about your long-term sustainability.
Can I add one point here? Just to complement, or I should say contrast, the points that Xalavier and Tanya are bringing up. I have actually had a developer, I wouldn't say argue, like negotiate. We didn't sign this deal in the end, but they actually said they didn't want the like a share right at the start. They wanted the publisher to recoup, being us, to recoup whatever costs and stuff we had incurred immediately, like 100%. Take it as fast as you can, and so that the faster you're done, the faster we as a developer get the lion's share. Assuming that the deal gives them the lion's share. There is some logic in that, but then like you said, Xalavier, if you're waiting 4 months or more, like say you've got a simultaneous release across all platforms, including PlayStation, those reports take a damn long time to come in. So that's 4, 5, 6 months, depending on how slow accounts are put in. That's a long time to not be eating.
Yeah.
So I mean, I have heard some developers put that argument forward, but I think it has to be considered extremely carefully whether you want to play it. If you have a safety net, sure, by all means, but sustainability is a very important word to keep in mind.
Considering the statements we've all made, I think the solution here is just to not eat. If you can find a way as a developer to not eat, everything is solved.
Yeah, I just want to add something. Like, I think even before the developers or like publishers sign deals, I think like both sides need to have like clear expectations and then risk analysis. Because like a lot of the developers that I meet, usually they are very, I don't know how to say it, but dreamy. Like they think like, oh, having a publisher will solve everything. Like suddenly I will have a lot of money and everything. But it doesn't. That's not the reality, right? So sometimes they, the developers themselves, they need to do market research. At least have a clear expectation of like, like what's the ceiling of like this game genre is gonna sell, and what's the bottom, and like what's the median, right? So when I make like a so-so game, I will fall on this area, and like the maximum is kind of like this game. So you have like clear expectation of like how many budget you're gonna spend versus like the possibility of like income or like revenue that the game is gonna generate. So from there, like you can kind of like do your math calculations for like risk and investment.
If I'm going to fund a game, like it's fine for the developer to be a bit dreamy and a bit optimistic, but I do really want them to have a realistic understanding of what risks they are taking by making this game and by signing with me or us. And so I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but I think it's common for publishers to want the developer to understand what risk they're asking the publisher to take. Because when you ask for this amount of money, you're asking them to take this amount of risk. And if you're asking for this amount of money, you're asking them to take this amount of risk. And so that can really help you as a developer guide that conversation to be realistic, and also for everybody to be on the same page about what this relationship is and how this game might perform or might perform. And what about the project is risky exactly? Is it something cultural? Is it something technological? Is it something else about the game?
I want to ask Lindsey real quick, like how would a game fund figure into this differently than a publisher?
So for us, we're actually structured differently in the way we recoup. So our developers always get first dollar. If they really would like to push for us to recoup it 100%, they can try. We'll probably say no, just for the sake of that's not healthy for the developer. We want you to be able to basically, reap the rewards of the hard work that you're doing. We're here to write a check and then stay out of the way, so you can take care of your creative vision and go from there. We do offer support, but we don't offer like publisher services. So we don't actually, hire the QA for you and put it on our accounting budgeting sheet. We don't hire Loc for you and put it on our sheet. We don't do the marketing for you. However, we work with you to develop your budget to account for all of those things, and then can make recommendations or introductions to different QA houses, port houses, etc. But really, we're actually looking for devs that they're mindful about sustainability. They understand like what their risks are that they're taking, because they're taking a lot of the risk in their success too. They're looking generally to self-publish. We are open to partnering with publishers for certain games because, as we all know, like finding an audience, building an audience is an incredibly difficult task. And when you do get smaller devs, those 2-person teams, we don't want to take away from their time either. But what we try to do is come in with the money earlier so they can potentially get a better revenue share later when they go to a publisher, because they don't need the money part, right? You're eliminating that huge component of risk for what a publisher might be outlaying. And it's like, hey, we need your expertise. And so you're coming in for the expertise of the publisher, their access to their audience. And so we get to balance that. But like for us as a fund, it's really about coming in and helping studios not only be financially stable, but also sort of knowledge equity stable. So you're building your skill sets about that marketing aspect. You're learning your release management, and you're going to mess up. Like I'm self-publishing for the first time on my title, the Red Lantern. I've previously done like, big publisher games like Activision games. And that's like a whole different beast. And that machine moves very fast, and it's arguably you can't move it in the way you want it to. And so I'm learning, I've made mistakes, and hopefully also through mine, I can help our developers to not make the mistakes that I do. And I think like Tanya and Xalavier can speak to the aspects of like how much time a demo takes away from doing your development. Like going to PAX is hell. It's so important, but it's hell. And so for us, it's about removing different aspects of friction, but providing full ownership to the developer. But like, there's a place for everyone in this industry. Different people need different help. Some people really just want money and partners to stay out of the way. And other people, like, not only do they need publisher help in like getting through like, cert, lot check, all those processes and just like learning what it is. But like that will help them be successful. And I think at the end of the day, we're all looking to find games that can be successful and make developers more successful. So we, rising tides, right? They raise all ships. So like, let's continue to kind of push that from all aspects. And that's how we look at it, is like, hopefully if we did it right, you don't need us in the future, but you want us, because we can help de-risk you. That's our goal.
Great.
And like
great.
right now, we just did Spirit Fair. We helped the Thunder Lotus guys fund that game, and they obviously did a lovely job with their self-publishing. And so it's very cool to see that, and hopefully they can share their knowledge, and they are sharing their knowledge with our other developers. So we continue to build that along the way.
Yeah. When you're thinking about like seeing if a game is going to be successful, when you look at a pitch, what are you sort of seen as something that might be good or something that might be terrible and setting up for failure in the future? This is a question for Kris.
Yeah, I think like when I see like a pitch, I could sometimes you can really tell like if the developer have done their research. Like, do they have like benchmark games that are their competitors? Like, how are you gonna like differentiate or like kind of like identify your hooks and stuff like that, and have realistic expectations of like what your project is, the timeline and budget, and then like like the scale of it. And a lot of pitches sometimes they don't include like the timeline development. They don't show roadmaps. They don't even have like like a clear scale of like what are the features they want to aim. So I think if they already done their research, and then they know they have like a clear direction of what kind of game they want to make and how they're gonna execute that, I think that's that's something, at least like it's a good start. And then of course after that, like talking with the developers and then understanding their vision is another step. It's a very important step after the pitch.
And as far as like looking for funding, how deep into development should developers be before they start looking for that? Like this is a question for Brian.
How deep into development? I think my personal recommendation is that you want to developers shouldn't assume that publishers can sort of magically construct the perfect vision of what a developer intends from like a paper pitch. So I personally recommend a prototype that at least achieves, I don't know, like 60-70% of their intended final art style, or even if it's just like literally a 1 or 2 minute playthrough or video, at least something that shows that helps people, not have to use their imagination to try and reach into your brain. So, a prototype gets that most effectively, I think, in terms of both mechanic and visual style. But if you've only got a video, that does help too. This is probably going to be pretty early on, so I think you'd still be in pre-production, I would say. And if you're pitching for funds, right, you'd probably not want to be so far in that you'd not want to be so early that you can barely answer questions about where you're headed and what your vision is.
Okay. And like Xalavier, when you're working without a publisher, like how deep in development are you before you start showing your game?
I think in general, as Brian really helpfully pointed out, you should be looking at these before you even start the development of the game. As soon as a brilliant game idea comes into your head, you want to be thinking about how it's going to be funded, how it's going to be marketed, how it's going to look, because that's a huge part of how games are sold, and at what point you do reveal. So when I'm looking at revealing my projects, because they often have, when I'm working on my own stuff, a development cycle of about 1.5 years or less. That means that I can't have like the quiet period of like a year of build up and content and stuff, and then brilliant reveal, we're coming out in 3 weeks. That all of those timelines are truncated. So often I structure the development cycle itself around how soon do we establish the core of what we're making and that it's actually works, and then the second bit of that is, okay, how soon do we get to a place where we can start talking about it? Because whether it's an open development process or a more structured release and marketing campaign, you need to talk about the game so that people can and will buy it. And if you fold that into the production schedule itself, then you're essentially getting a whole lot of additional work for free. The number one thing that I see, especially beginning indies, needing a desperate assistance in, and that publishers can help in massively because they've seen how other processes have gone right and wrong, is building up a knowledge of production.
And once you're, I guess, outside of the production, David, like what does that marketing push actually look like? Like when publishers are working with developers, like what is the publisher bringing to the table? Like we talked around marketing a little bit, but let's get into it more.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Tanya kind of broached this subject a little bit earlier. Like, real quick, I do want to say, kind of building off what Brian and Xalavier were saying, is that bringing a project too late to a publisher can actually hinder a lot of these marketing effects. Xalavier's just talked about extensively how it's really important that you build kind of like marketing activities into development timeline, because then you can utilize these things for your own promotion, which is necessary if you're trying to make a business out of creating games. When we get pitched games too far into their development, a lot of time we won't take them on or even consider them because we will have missed the chance to make a big marketing splash. The first reveal is really important. Sometimes we get people trying to pitch us games that are in early access already, and they're already out. Like we can't do anything really marketing wise there. You've used up a lot of the momentum already before approaching a publisher. So when I think about like what it is that a publisher can bring to the table in regards to the marketing, is it does help that, because we've this isn't our first rodeo, that we have a little bit of knowledge in regards to what audiences might be receptive to the type of game that you have. Maybe the game that you have lines up with the publisher's catalog, which is great. Sometimes it doesn't line up with the publisher's catalog, and if you're okay with that and the publisher's okay with that, and they must be if they're willing to take kind of a larger risk, hopefully they got something up their sleeve there in regards to the marketing. I think that what a publisher can bring to the marketing is it's just like a lot of aside from experience, like kind of like a lot of strengths in regards to funding and whatnot. I'm not saying that publishers want to blow up your project costs. Nobody wants to do that because we all want to try to make this sustainable and be profitable in the end. But we do have that ability to at least fund some maybe grander marketing ideas as something a little crazy, something that's not inherently organic, kind of like your paid marketing component, stuff like that, reaching the proper target audiences, all that stuff. So I guess it's just a matter of having a little more muscle to play around with, having a bit more experience, having data to draw on from other title launches that can be applied to your own title launch. But also, I would highly encourage developers who do take a publisher to work closely with those publishers' marketing departments and make sure that the activities that are being done on behalf of your project actually align with what you want and actually something that you think could truly benefit the game. Like if a marketing or brand manager comes up to you and says like, "Oh, I got this idea to do something, crazy, and it costs like $1 million to do or something ridiculous," and you're like, I'm not really comfortable with that. Could we do this instead? Like, hopefully your publisher is the kind of publisher that will actually take your recommendation seriously and not barrel over you. If they're barreling over you, find a different publisher. If it's, you want a publisher that will be a partner with you, that will work alongside you, and they should be willing to take a look at any marketing ideas that you as a developer bring to the table.
I think there's also historically a problem with publishers saying that they're going to do X, Y, Z, and then either they don't do it or it's unclear how much of it they did. Like there's not a lot of evidence for what exactly happened. But they just, we spent this amount of money on you. And how do you prove that? So I don't know how true this is anymore, but 5 or 10 years ago, it was definitely the case that I had a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, they say I owe them, $500,000, but like, did they buy ads in GQ? Like, what happened? Like, I don't know." It's maybe they just racked up hours browsing the internet and called it research. And so just being able to have like a timely, itemized list of where the marketing costs are being spent is step one for you to know what's going on and make sure that's in the contract. But as far as what publishers want, they do want you to have ideas, and they want you, typically, if they're good, to be involved in the activities because they want your assets, they want your art and your vision to be part of how it connects with the audience. And so even if you're a marketing newbie and you have no idea how to market your game, knowing what's great about your game and knowing what people are going to love about it is step one. And so they'll love to hear about it.
And one last thing that will help folks who might be in this position is you can actually have as a clause in your contract to avoid getting sprung on you the $1 million marketing campaign that you have to approve expenses, single itemized expenses that are over a certain amount. So if they're about to spend $10,000, you can say, you can have as a clause in your contract that costs over $5,000, $10,000 have to be approved by the developer. And that can save you from, I paid for the team's vacation to Japan where they pitched to Nintendo once. That's a lot of money.
This is a very interesting subject because in Toge Productions, we thought all marketing costs should be absorbed by the publisher because we feel like it's a lot more fair that way because the publisher by doing they're responsible for marketing, right? So that's their part of what they put into the project. So we feel like that's got to be our investment. So all projects that being published by Toge, we don't put the marketing costs in the recoup. So everything is absorbed by Toge, and so that's just something that we want to show. We put this investment in this project because we believe in you guys, and we don't want to burden you on that marketing costs. So yeah, I thought a lot of publishers do that. So apparently.
I think that a lot of indie publishers do that. In fact, I know that we're not charging anybody for hours or whatever. We have a trailer producer, for example. We're not being like, "Oh, it took him 10 hours to make that trailer, so now we're gonna that's a $200,000. Yeah, that's what it is. We're not doing anything like that. If it's an external cost, if it's something that we can't do ourselves in-house, then we'll talk to the developer. If it's a very high cost, we'll get that approved by them ahead of time. Like Xalavier said, we have this in our agreements where we have a minimum marketing spend. And then once that has been reached, then we need to be talking to our developers about every single thing that we're doing. So we're not trying to bloat costs. Again, doesn't make sense anyway to bloat costs because the publisher also has to pay that back. But it's even more crucial for a developer because they don't have the pocket money that a publisher has to sustain itself while they're waiting for that first payment to come in, right?
Also wanted to loop back a little bit on the idea of pitching, where like when to come at your idea or come to a publisher with your idea. Like, yes, there are certain ones that are paper and certain ones where you need to have a build. Also, don't be afraid to go back to publishers. But that process you're taking when you talk to a fund, a publisher, a friend is the same thing you're doing throughout the entire development cycle. That's what builds your marketing campaign, right? That first thing you're able to say to get somebody excited about your paper pitch or your first build, you're then just continuing to build upon that one conceit across the board. So like, think about that as like every step you take in development is another path to pursue publishing again, right? Or funding again if you don't have it yet. It's a way to potentially do Kickstarter or crowdfunding or Patreon. It allows you to build an audience on Twitter. It allows you to bring that demo to PAX and build that audience there. So there's so many entry points that you can have. It could be reaching out to, it's harder to reach out to a platform, but technically you can do that and try to get into a marketing showcase or whatever that may or may not be. But like, don't be, in a sense, like, know when your game has the right thing, but also test. I like to test ideas, and we test things that way where it's like, I'll just talk to a friend who's maybe not a gamer. I'm not really worried about someone stealing my idea necessarily because it's like all in execution. But like, let me do my like 2-line pitch to you. Is this of interest, right? And if you can get a spark there, great. Now let's explore what the 1 page looks like. Does that still generate a spark? Let's now start prototyping. Does that have the spark? And so constantly like tweak and build up from there, because you're really like molding out of clay, right, to find what that thing is. And you have to first kind of rough in that shape and go from there and use that as the entry point to start talking to any of us and see what that can be. And also to the point of not coming too late, not only for marketing problems, it doesn't let us visualize anything. You filled in all the gaps at that point. And honestly, part of a great pitching element is letting us imagine the best version of the game too, right? And if you're already done that, like, hopefully it is the best version of the game, but we all know development's pretty hard. So like, there's going to be things that you've changed in scope at some point along the way. So like, let everyone like build that up and let's come at it together. So you can hopefully hit that full vision. But I think like all the marketing discussions and everything that are happening here, it's like the key part of making your game. But like, don't forget, marketing starts at the very second you start creating your game, and you're just going to continue doing that forever. And if you own your own IP and you have this passive income, that never stops. You're bringing it to new platforms, you're refreshing some kind of content, and that's the exciting part of being able to make this kind of content and go from there.
It's very interesting. Like it's the pitch isn't like the end. It's sort of a process that's growing and changing. Lindsey, like as far as when developers are coming up with the monetization plan, do you think that they should have a complete monetization plan together, or is that sort of a thing that you would again collaborate with the publisher on, trying to figure out the one that works?
For us, we want you to have sort of your idealized vision. Like where do you want to release the game? What are your core platforms? Are you doing additional content? You definitely need to have a budget. Like you might not need to have like the full spec of we expect to sell, like have a target number of units. Here's our competitive. Don't just choose outliers. Please try to choose the middle band, and you can say like at the top end we could do Fall Guys numbers, but don't use Fall Guys as your main example. And so, but like show like a knowledge of how your budget relates to how those kind of games in that band work, right? Like, also don't pitch, you know, a $20 million dating simulator. Like, that's gonna be a really tough sell. And so like find where those kind of huh?
I said,
Brian-
I hope
Brian-
someone makes that. Yeah.
I think Brian wants that actually.
Who's ready?
Where's the market just needs to wake up, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I love BioWare to always pitch their games that way. That's how I play them, at least. I play them like AAA dating simulators. But like that's a huge part when you are also pitching to publishers. Know your game, know your market. You don't have to say like we don't expect you to understand the full minutia of everything. If you do, great. Like, but mostly understand like where you're headed. We're here to help with some of that. But understand your competitive advantages, understand the market in which you're entering, and be prepared to, you know, sort of defend some of the statements that you're making, especially if they're really out there, because we will ask those questions like, hey, here's your production plan, here's what you think you're making, is this really what it is? And going from there to like, where do we see this kind of success? Because like for all of us, we're open, we want to take big risks, we want to do the thing, but like especially on an alternative model, we have to prove out that this model can be successful. So we're pretty selective about where we pick things to make sure that we're showing like you can be successful in giving the developer, you know, making them do everything in a sense, like giving them the opportunity to do everything and giving them money at the start. It's not going to work for everyone, but like we want to prove that there is success in that kind of pathway. So we do, I mean, to be frank, we choose more business-minded. There's a section of business-minded studios, so they know how they're going to fit into that. So we'll choose super artistic sometimes, but like we definitely, since we don't have all those services, we need to know you can execute and that you kind of understand where you live in the market.
Mm-hmm. And I guess going further on the discussion of scope a little bit, Kris, what are the signs that a pitch is too big, like scoped wise, or that a team isn't seeking enough money? You're muted right now.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, when you send your pitch, usually you have like a benchmark, like you know, what's your competitor, like what's your kind of like what's your genre, so like you know where do you compare your games, and just what Lindsey say, like when you compare your game to like Fall Guys, that's like an outlier, like that's so far out, right? So if your team is like only 2 guys with a very, you know, like very small budget, and you're aiming to something like so far out, then that's probably, you know, it's too far away. And also like pitching to a publisher for like funding doesn't mean like it will solve all your problems, right? It doesn't mean like because now you have like this $1 million budget, you could hire everybody. Because like in the end, like you also have to understand how to execute that idea, and then have, you know, like who's gonna direct the game and make sure like that, you know, the experience that what you want to deliver is exactly what you want it to be, right? And not diverge along the development process, because, you know, like sometimes making a game takes 2 to 3 years, and along the way sometimes you can diverge, but you don't want to diverge too much, right? So because when you diverge too much, then you're gonna end up in like development hell, and then you can, you know, you'll try to add more features, more things, and you know you're going nowhere. So at least have a clear timeline, and maybe if your timeline is like more than 2 years, maybe you have to start thinking of scoping down, and then make sure that the comparisons that you're using, the benchmarks that you're using, is that something that's within that, like within your capabilities. So you have to know your limits and what your skill set is, and not use the outliers as your, you know, like your benchmark. So because like it's the chance of like hitting that success is gonna be very, very small. Yeah, perhaps maybe others have, you know, like things to add on this.
Yeah, I had another follow-up question about it. I guess for Xalavier, like as a developer, like when do you know what to cut? Like when you're trying to determine what's going to be outside of that scope.
Your scope can increase infinitely or decrease infinitely. It will be painful either way. So one major thing I advocate actually is in the earliest production stage as possible. If you're trying to figure out what to cut, you essentially cut away as much as possible. You keep cutting and cutting, and you think, does this still offer the fundamental vision I want to bring into the world? Is this still an appealing game for the market in terms of the length, in terms of the polish, in terms of the visual or visual quality or gameplay complexity? Everything is based upon achieving that creative vision, and if anything, having the flexibility to say, actually, this game could fit this box, but it could also fit this box, and it could be still be a really compelling box. Identifying that gives you a really great chance to say, let's say that the right publisher relationship does come along. It does give you an opportunity to say, here are the exact ways in which it could expand that would help it, as opposed to being an arbitrary budget sink, or here's ways that it absolutely cannot be cut because it's fundamental to what the game is. Whatever you're doing, I was just going to say, whatever you're doing, whatever your development process is, figure out what exactly you are making as soon as possible so you can make those decisions.
Of course, it's harder for some genres and some audiences and whatever. If you're trying to make an open world game, you've from the beginning you've signed on for a ridiculous scope. It's kind of like the new like don't make an MMO as your first game thing. But depending on the genre, the most important thing I think about that early formation that Lindsey was talking about, where you have the 2 sentences that describe the game, and you have the 1 page that describes the game, and you have your prototype, is that you are defining for yourself, not just other people, what the core actually is of that user experience. So when someone's playing your game, like, does it really matter that there's 500 butterflies or whatever, or is the important thing that catching the butterfly feels really good? And if the point is that 1 verb, that core gameplay is really good, then maybe set aside what happens if there aren't 500 varieties of things to do with that core gameplay, and how to make that compelling. But it's a lot easier if you've defined from the beginning what is so great about this, and haven't just sort of wandered into making something where if you cut all the variety, then suddenly you don't have a game anymore. So yeah, just crystallizing it into words specifically, I think, can actually be really helpful for your future self in 6 months when you're sort of mired in not sure what to cut.
Just to add a little bit, like I think if you could focus on the player's experience of when you're playing, like what kind of experience do you want the players to feel when they're playing your game, that would help a lot in directing your game, right? For example, like when we start making Coffee Talk, Fahmi, which is the creator that comes up with the idea for Coffee Talk, the pitch was like, I want to make a game where the player can feel like they're holding a warm drink and drinking like coffee or any warm drink when there's raining outside, and then you're listening to music and talking to your friends. So that's like the pitch is that sentence. And I think we focus on that player experience throughout development to make sure like, okay, this is the experience that we want players to feel. And then we cut everything that doesn't deliver that experience. And yeah, so the Coffee Talk is actually a very small game, right? But I think the experience is delivered very well.
It's true even for big games. I think the most successful games and the most successful pitches I've seen focus on the player experience, that feeling of what feeling are you trying to give the player, and if you can communicate that, then I think you'll make a better game, and publishers will be more excited too.
Great. And as far as like what publishers like as looking for as far as their brand or their catalog, Tanya, should you pitch to a publisher that doesn't seem to have games that are sort of match like your game doesn't really match their catalog as much. I was trying to like look at Kitfox specifically, and like you guys have a lot of different games like in your catalog. It's a lot of variety.
Yeah, we've sort of taken on friends that we think that some portion of our audience will really like the game because there's some RPG element or there's some systemic element. But yeah, we're a bit more messy, I would say, in our definition of what exactly the games we're looking for. And I think that is generally true for publishers, that if a game really stands out to them, they'll find a way. But the question for you is, do you think that their audience matches your game? Because even if the publisher is willing to take that risk and say, okay, we want to grow our audience to include fans of this kind of game, you have to understand that that's going to be harder for them than to take their existing, I don't know, million players or whatever and show them something that they know they're already going to like because they liked something else. Devolver is a really interesting example of, it seemed like most of their catalog was Pixel Blood, but now they have Fall Guys, right? And it's not just Fall Guys. They also had Hatoful Boyfriend. They've had a couple of other successes that sort of buck the trend. And if you actually look at it, their audience is sort of a devil may care attitude. That's sort of the actual Devolver core, it would seem. And some of it is, Pixel Blood focused, but they have a lot of other flavors. And I think the short answer to your question is pitch everybody. But I would focus your efforts on those publishers that you think you'll get the most value out of. And of course, be realistic that, it's clear Annapurna seems to be more focused on a narrative, cinematic type experience. So they'll be more interested in that. Maybe don't spend weeks and weeks of your time trying to craft a pitch for a Metroidvania to them. But at the same time, there's no reason to limit your options. If you're making a cool game and you think that a publisher might suit the needs that you have, then absolutely pitch to them. It's just a matter of controlling your own time and investment at that point.
And we've been talking about Fall Guys, I guess, a lot recently. I think everyone is playing it. It's an amazing game, but it's taking advantage of a few things that I noticed. One is an indie game that uses like a games as a service platform. It's also, I think, launched on PlayStation Plus simultaneously. David, how would you see like developers looking at subscription services and games as a service as far as their pitches and sort of their like expectations in creating a game? Like, should they be considering this thing early on? Should they be something that comes later? Like, what do you think?
Oh, there is a lot to unpack with that one.
Yeah, a little bit.
I feel like this is actually like the really hot internal debate amongst a lot of developers and publishers in general, like the cultural shift of stuff like Game Pass and PS Plus. Okay, so let's start with real quick. Let's just start with Fall Guys, right? Because you mentioned it, and we have been talking about it a little bit. It took a cue from what Rocket League did many years ago with offering this game to players for free to build up a gigantic community. PlayStation, I'm sure, paid out the nose for it, and good, because that game is worth it. And then simultaneously, they launched themselves a community on Steam through some very clever social media tricks, or not tricks, strategy, both. That what's the gentleman's name? Oliver. He's very gifted. And I think that a developer ultimately should probably just consider what it is that they think is best for their game. I don't think they need to necessarily think about, will I be able to get a Game Pass deal? Will I be able to get Microsoft's attention for this thing, right? Will I be able to get Sony to pony up money or something? I would dare say you probably want to leave that for a publisher anyway, because they might be able to negotiate a better deal for you. I'm not saying it should be completely out of mind, but I don't think it should be like the focus of your pitch, or even the center of your pitch, or maybe even a page on your pitch. You should just, when you're trying to get a publisher's attention, you should just be talking about the game itself, the scope for it, and the publisher will be able to figure out pretty quickly if they think they can sell it to first party. They most of the time we can look at a game and be like, oh, I bet you Microsoft would take a look at that for Game Pass. I bet you Apple might take a look at that for Apple Arcade. So yeah, I think for the pitch itself, right, for the formulation of the pitch and your pre-production and whatnot, you should just focus on the game being what you want it to be. And if you're going to go the publisher route, they can certainly take a look at it. The money that's being thrown around by Microsoft and Sony and Apple is insane. Like, a lot of the deals that are coming through will pay for your development and then some. Like, you'll be in the green before you even launch your game. The story is I won't say it's common, but it's not uncommon either to hear about, especially over the last couple of years. A lot of these first party platforms are throwing a ton of money to get people to buy into their subscription services. How that impacts us culturally, that's a whole other like panel that you could have about whether or not this is even a good or a bad thing. When we start making games to sustain our studios, and when we start making games just for large first party platforms, and that's it. But that aside, no, I don't think you need to worry about it as a developer so early.
And we're already at 55 minutes. Went by really quick for me. So I guess like a question for everybody: what are some beginner mistakes you notice indies make when looking for funding or talking to a publisher? And just like really quick, so we can run through and then close. So we'll start with Tanya.
I think the biggest mistake is not focusing on knowing who you're making your game for. If you've defined your player experience of what that feeling is you want to give the player, you should know who will love that experience, who will really connect with that offering that you're giving. And if you can define that, then everything will be so much easier. Don't put it off, even though it's a scary question, and even though it doesn't produce code or art immediately. It's the most important part of game development.
Okay. And Lindsey.
From a publisher side and fund side, for me, it's as well thought out production plan as you can have, and a knowledge of the things that are your unknown scaries. Not being willing to acknowledge something that's scary in your development cycle is sort of a yellow flag from the other side, where they're like, nah, it's all going to be easy. And you're like, that's not true. And so you want your developer to know, like, hey, I understand this will be hard. We're going to figure out what it means, what this game is as we're making it too, right? Like, you're learning how to make the game as you're making the game. There's so much that comes out of that. So being really honest with yourself that, like, hey, here's what we're after. This is what we're building. Here's how we're pursuing this. Here are features, team plan, but also being open. Like, we understand this part's scary. We think we're ready for it, but like, here's like one of our risks, basically. You don't have to do like a big SWOT analysis or something like that, but you should just be aware of it from your own development, because they're going to come up, and that's the thing that can bite you. And so it's just knowing that and being honest about it. We'll ask the question anyway, because we're going to see it. We're going to see that you don't have any network ops people on your production plan, but you have a online game. So we're going to ask that question. So like, make sure that all of that vision's cohesive and you're thinking about it.
And Xalavier.
Especially when you're self-funding, the number one mistake I see is not accounting for all the invisible things. Again, this is an incredible area where a game fund or a publisher can help you, at least in calling out, you haven't accounted for this. If in terms of your design, you have, say this could be an inventory system or spend a certain amount of time making that. Does your design require an inventory system, or is the player only going to really have 8 things throughout the game? And you can make assumptions around that shorten your dev timeline and how much money you're putting into a modular inventory system very early on. In terms of the entire development cycle, absolutely just taking anything for granted in terms of how much does a PAX booth cost? You need to get in the before times, how much did a PAX booth cost? How much was it to get a TV, a charger cord, a table, chairs? Everything has a cost, either in terms of time or money. So asking around, getting plugged into the game community, even asking publishers, because often they want to tell you, hey, this is actually getting localization for this type of game is actually going to cost you $20,000. do you have that money? And if not, what are you prioritizing or deprioritizing to make this happen if localization is a major part of your plans? It all matters. It all comes together. Don't take anything for granted.
Mhm. And lightning round, we got to go really quickly. Brian.
How do I make this quick? I think developers really need to consider the fit they have with the publishers they're trying to court. From a publisher point of view, we look at market risk. How your title fits into the overall market. What's the risk that it'll sell gangbusters or whether it'll fail, versus execution risk, which is like what Lindsey talked about earlier, like your production plan and how you execute it, but also who you are as a team. Like, do you all vibe together, and do we as a publisher vibe with you? Because if picking on a point I think Tanya brought up earlier, if you can't show us how you're excited for your game, that's going to be a real bad fit.
David.
I mean, I'm just going to link onto what Brian said too real fast. Like, if a publisher takes you on, you're in a relationship now. This isn't like, oh, your game comes out in like 3 months or whatever. It's like, no, you're probably working together for at least 2 years or something like that. So what I would say is, make the game that you want to make. Don't pitch a game that you think is going to be attractive to a publisher. Like, if you want to make some really cool, like, niche strategy game, but, Slay the Spire / Monster Train games are the hot thing, so I'm just going to make that instead. Don't do that. Make the thing you want to make. Don't try to make a game that you're not passionate about just because you think a publisher might pick it up.
And Kris.
Yeah, I think everybody already answered the question. But yeah, just to add, I think you need to do your own research, right? So not doing your research, that would be a big mistake. Research in terms of like your market research, who's your target market, target audience, and then the publisher, like Brian and David already mentioned, like what kind of publisher you're pitching. Do you have a fit with them? And in terms of like cohesive and stuff like that. So yeah, do your research before.
Okay. And before we close, just want to let everyone have a chance to like say what they're working on or promote anything. We'll go back in reverse order. Kris.
We're developing a Space for the Unbound with Mochiken Studio from Surabaya, which is it's an adventure game set in 90s Indonesia that tells a story about a boy and a girl, and how do they have a relationship and overcome anxiety, depression, and stuff like that. And it's based on our own childhood experience growing up in Indonesia, so it's going to be something interesting to show and to play. Yeah.
Sounds fun. David?
Star Renegades comes out September 8th. It's like looks like a JRPG, but it's like this insanely good tactical strategy game. Where none of that RNG stuff. Everything is laid out for you. If you lose, it's on you. So check it out. Beautiful pixel art. Go Canada.
Okay. Brian?
Please look forward to our upcoming action RPG, No Place for Bravery. Again, also beautiful pixel art and a brutal, heavy Dark Souls-like combat, and we'll have more to share about it in the coming weeks, months, maybe weeks.
Okay. Tanya?
Yeah. We're going to be releasing a mystery game where you find the contradictions in testimonies from witnesses, called Lucifer Within Us. You're a digital exorcist, and that's coming out in October because it's spooky. And then Boyfriend Dungeon will be coming out in some after that, where you date your weapons from the dungeon. So yeah, follow Kitfox Games and Dwarf Fortress someday, but you can look it up for yourself.
A lot of games. Lindsey?
Yeah, Spiritfarer from Thunder Lotus just released last week, a little cozy management game about death. We've got Welcome to Elk coming shortly after. I think, I don't know, remember what's announced sometime this fall. And that's a lovely little story game. And then the Red Lantern's also coming out this fall. So we got a packed little set coming up. So we're looking for some interesting games and story takes. They all have their own unique angles, and lots more coming over the next couple of years.
Wonderful. Xalavier?
I'm doing a wild amount of stuff, including comics now, which is a new adventure. But the major things I would say is Wishlist Skatebird, a game about being a bird on a skateboard and doing your best on Steam right now, as well as an Airport for Aliens currently run by Dogs, which is an open world comedy adventure game about traveling a universe of simulated airports run by stock photo dogs and solving their problems. Tanya, you were right. Don't make an open world game. Just don't do it.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule for this. I also want to thank Josh Altman for helping me record the backup, Chris Wolf, those awesome guys for encouraging me to do this panel, and the PAX Online staff for putting this together in this weird, challenging time. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their PAX, and thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
See ya.
Thank you. See ya.